nice to have the sun shining, the warming temperatures again, and the reality is it won't be long we'll be griping about the heat. We've spent how many months complaining about the cold and the snow, and it won't be long and we're going to be grumping about the heat. We're just a grumpy bunch of people, aren't we? Well, we're going to be wrapping up our series called I Am, and we've been taking a look at the different times that Jesus made that statement of I am. And the first one we looked at was when he said, I am the resurrection and the life, before he raised Lazarus from the dead. And we looked at the fact that that statement, it gives us the indication that the resurrection is more than just a person, more than just an event. It is the person of Jesus. He says, I am the resurrection. It is the person of Christ. And then we looked at his statement, I am the good shepherd, and the fact that he's willing to leave the 99 and go after the one lost soul. And that if any one of us happened to be the only person that ever needed to be saved, he would have died just for us. And we looked at that concept of how great his love is as the good shepherd. And last week we looked at when he said, I am the light of the world, and the fact that he wants to be the light of our individual worlds. Not just a general statement, but he wants to be a light for your world, for my world. He wants to have that personal connection. And so that brings us up to what obviously comes on the heels of that concept of when we look at this week, if you would, John chapter 15, where it says, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So, apart from me, you can do nothing. That's pretty dramatic when you think about it. Jesus says, you can't do a thing without me. Okay? That's a pretty strong statement, but when you contextualize it as to when it was said, it begins to take on a whole new level of significance. It begins to make a whole lot more sense. You see, this statement is found in John 15. Well, in John 13, we see a broader view of what's called the Last Supper and what took place before he was arrested and crucified, which happens in chapter 18. So we have a lot of stuff that's squeezed in here between chapters 13 and 18, and 15 kind of falls right there in the middle of that. Okay? So the other three gospel writers show us Jesus giving us what we know as the Lord's Supper or communion. We read the one gospel writer's account this morning as part of the meditation, and they focus on the importance of that memorial, the importance of the bread and the fruit of the vine. But John takes a different approach. He gives us a bigger picture. He gives us the table talk that was taking place during that meal. And so we got chapter 13, we start with the Last Supper. Chapter 18 is when he goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane. He's arrested and taken away to be crucified. And so what we have in between 13 and 18 is dinner conversation. The last dinner that Jesus was going to have with his disciples, and the true Lord's Prayer as they walk into Gethsemane takes place in chapter 17. So let me ask you, if I said, I'm going to sit you around a table with your friends and family, and you knew it would be the last time you would speak to them before you would die, would you think about that conversation a little bit? Yeah, if you were about to sit down with some people and you knew it was going to be the last time that you were going to be able to speak to them before you died, I'm sure all of us would take a lot of time considering exactly what we're going to say. What might you want them to know about how you feel about them? Or maybe some life lesson that you want to impart to them before, you check out. Yeah. And this is the context in which we see Jesus say, I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit, and apart from me you can do nothing. And so that's very, very important we understand that context of this conversation. He knows he's about to die. He has thought about what he is going to say for a long time. He's been preparing for this. And everything that takes place between chapter 13 and chapter 18 are things that are very important to Christ that he wants to pass on to his disciples. And so he says, if a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. So, why is being connected to the vine so very important? Well, let's think about what some of you might have been doing earlier in this year, maybe recently, maybe you still need to do it. I know I've already been looking at some of what I need to do, and that is, a lot of times at this point in time, you start getting ready to trim back the shrubs and the bushes. What happens to those clippings? They just wither and die, don't they? When they get separated from the rest of the bush or the rest of the tree, which is connected to the central point, the roots or the vine or whatever, they wither and die. That connection is crucial as to whether or not they will survive. The reason we trim them back is because some of them survive all too well when they're connected and grow really fast. But the idea is that when they get separated, what's been clipped off and set aside withers and dies. We don't want that, do we? No. We want to be connected to the true vine, because when we do, we will bear much fruit. Matter of fact, in John 15:1, if you would, Jesus said, I am the true vine. Oh, that takes the statement a little bit farther. I am the true vine, which would imply that there are false vines that we connect ourselves to. Such as we might say, might be amongst those that say, well, if I make more money next year and I can climb one rung up at the company ladder, and well, that's bearing fruit. That's fruitful. And Jesus would say, no, not so much. Or it's, if I could just attain a certain social status, in other words, I wear the right things, get in style, wear the right things, get the right technology in my pocket, the latest Apple product, anything else, that's old stuff, you got to have the Apple product, the iPad, the iPhone, the iTablet, the this, that. Sounds kind of self-centered, doesn't it? I. And heaven forbid I should have another brand. Goodness gracious. Now, I got this new thing, if I get retweeted by the right person, then I'll retweet who tweeted me just to let everybody know that this important person tweeted me, retweeted me. Tweet, 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 tweet. Y'all a tweet bunch. And then I'll look cool if I just get a certain number of friends on Facebook. A certain number of friends. Boom, there I am. Fruit. Yeah. Jesus would say, no, not so much there either. Or sometimes it looks like the appearance of something good, something that we're going to do that is really good, and we think it's the right thing to do, and we do this because we want people to think we've got it all together. We want to look good, even though inside we might be falling apart. We don't want people to know what the inside is like. We want them to see the good outside, that illusion that we put out in front of them. And Jesus would say, that's not fruit either. That's a false vine. That's not a good thing. It's silly, but what we want to do, what we want to stay connected to the true vine. And in so doing, we'll bear much fruit. So why is it important to stay connected to the true vine? Well, first thought there is that if you would, staying connected produces fruit. Okay? Staying connected produces fruit. That's the heart of what he was saying. And you see that right there in that John 15:5 passage we opened up with. And let me tell you something. I'm going to keep going over, bringing this back up, that staying connected bears fruit, produces fruit. Because, I want you to really begin to understand that concept. I want you to let it lodge in your head and then have it find its way into your life this week, as we strive together to bear fruit, the kind of fruit that Christ wants us to bear. See, Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. But here's the kicker. It's not just any kind of fruit we're talking about here. Not just any kind of fruit. So what kind of fruit are we talking about? Well, the one type that the Bible talks about is found in Galatians 5:22, if you would. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. And notice, one of the things I want you to notice there is it does not say, but the fruits of the Spirit. We want to break these down as all kind of separate little things. It says the fruit. In other words, bearing proper fruit means that all of these are there. And sometimes we look at that list and we want to separate them out as something different. But the truth is, if we are staying connected to the vine the way we are supposed to be staying connected, we will be bearing all of these as the fruit. And that's the kind of fruit Jesus says we will bear. Because there's something also important to understand, that when that kind of fruit is being born in our lives, that it will produce another type of fruit. And if you would, that's kingdom growth. It starts with the fruit of the Spirit. And once we are bearing the fruit of the Spirit, once that is taking place, we have kingdom growth. Because what happens, if you would, the fruit of the Spirit will draw people to Jesus. Let's face it, if you look through that list called the fruit of the Spirit, do you see anything negative in there? Not a thing. As you look around this world today, how much negative do you see? Let me ask you something. Can you turn on the TV and listen to the news without there being negative after negative after negative after negative? I don't know about you, but I have a feeling people in this world, I know especially in this nation, but probably around this world, I think people are kind of getting tired of negative. And then you begin to understand why bearing that positive fruit will bring people to Christ. I think we probably have a nation right now that would love to have a positive, something to grasp hold of. And we've got it. It's Jesus Christ. And the fruit that we can bear when we stay connected to Him. But let's face it. Sometimes it's hard to stay connected, isn't it? Sometimes it's really hard to stay connected. Things happen. We get upset or distracted. Or sometimes the things that happen, sometimes they'll happen within the church. Sometimes they happen at home. Sometimes they happen at work. Sometimes they happen down at the grocery store. And many times it's just little things that build over time that get our attention. And as they build, they have a tendency to make other things look bigger than they are. You ever thought about that? Have you ever had something that was some kind of little thing that was kind of gnawing at you, and it had you kind of on edge, and everything else just looked like it was out of proportion? Yeah, I think that happens to all of us. Something gets to bothering you, and everything else starts bothering you. Things look bigger than they are, and the next thing you know, you've lost the connection to the vine without realizing it. It's easy to do. At some point in time, it happens to all of us. We all struggle with it. But we begin to look at what's going on in our lives, and we realize that there's not being any fruit produced anymore. We find ourselves miserable all the time. Everything starts looking negative all the time. And we've lost the positive of that fruit of the Spirit. And life becomes days filled with stress, anxiety, hurt feelings, doubts, anger, frustration. You know what I mean. We all deal with it from time to time. It happens. And you know as well as I do that as we're dealing with all of these things, we start offering excuses to God as to why we're not doing the things that we should be doing, as we're not at the places we're supposed to be at. We start giving excuses as to why we're not connected in the way He wants us connected. And the thing is, you know as well as I do that as we're offering God all of these excuses, it's not like He's up there surprised about all this. They're like, oh, my bad. I didn't know you were going through all of that. Sorry. Yeah. We know that's not going on. He knows exactly what's going on. He's up there. He's not surprised by it. It's more like God saying, hey, who do you think gave you those kids that have you running around everywhere all the time? Who do you think is offering the expansion of that position at work so that you can move up the ladder? Truth be known, if God would whisper in your ear, He'd tell you, I know exactly what's going on in your life. And that's why you need to stay connected. And yet we try to separate the things going on in our life, positive and negative as well. We try to separate those from God's omniscience, His knowing everything that's going on, and the things that He is working to do in our lives. And it brings us kind of back to, like in Numbers, where we read the story of Moses, and he led the Israelites into the desert, and they were complaining because they wanted meat. Remember that? And Moses is like, what am I going to do? I can't give you meat. I can't do this. I can't do that. What do you want me to do? And God was like, okay, they want meat. I'll give them meat. I'll give them so much meat it's going to be coming out their nose. I mean, that's actually what He said. It's going to come out their nostrils. They're going to get sick of it. And while Moses is there trying to explain to God why he can't do what the Israelites are doing, God is telling him, well, it's because you need to be letting me do it. And it's in that context that in Numbers 23 we read, the Lord answers Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? In other words, don't you think I can handle this? Stop trying to assume this responsibility on yourself. No, you can't do it. I can handle it. As a matter of fact, not only am I going to handle it, I'm going to give them more than they ever expected. So much more that they're going to get sick of it. Is the Lord's arm too short? In other words, God is saying, stay connected, Moses. I'll take care of this. I mean, the reason God did things the way He did at that point in time and gave them so much meat that they got sick of is because they were grumbling and complaining about what they didn't have. He had been providing manna. He had been making sure that their clothes didn't wear out. He had been taking care of them, and it just wasn't good enough. And they were grumbling about what they didn't have. So God says, okay, I'll give you what you want. Let's see how long it takes for you to get sick of it. And so the Lord says, is my arm too short? And I think most of us would probably respond, no, your arm's not too short. You can handle this. But yet, so much of our lives we spend doing just the opposite. And what happens when we reach the point of realizing that God knows everything that is going on in our lives, and we begin to understand that those things are the very reason we need to be connected? What happens is there's this little tiny blossom called faithfulness that begins to appear in our lives. Just a little one. I wouldn't call it fruit by any means, but it is a blossom. It's the start of something God is doing in your life, something special, something to lead you to the point of being properly connected and begin to bear fruit. I don't know, maybe you're finding yourself there today, that you're having to rediscover that faithfulness, and there's a blossom there, things starting to grow. Then sometimes we find ourselves doing everything we can do to stay connected, but it just doesn't seem like there's fruit happening, the fruit that we're hoping for. That family member or friend you've been praying for a long time, and just that you want them to come to know the Lord. You want them to become connected. You want them to be saved. And yet, it just simply doesn't seem to be happening. In fact, it seems like the more you try to stay connected, the more you pray, you feel like asking, what's happening, Lord? What's going on? They seem to be going the opposite direction. But God says, stay connected, be patient. We won't always get the fruit that we want as a result of the fruit of the Spirit. Because we have to keep in mind, people make their own choices. But God would say, don't give up, stay connected. Keep praying. Or maybe it's a sense of anger, that you're easily angered. Someone gets angry so very easily, and it's just driving you crazy, and you keep thinking to yourself, why can't I just get over things? God would say, is my arm too long? Stay connected. Stay connected. Or is it that selfishness that we tend to have that we're sick of? Let's face it, we have a tendency to be selfish. We at times want the world to revolve around us, don't we? And you see it often, people, I want this, I want that, and I think this, and I think that, and it's all I, and we all struggle with it. Or maybe it's some other problem, just you want gone from your life and you just can't seem to get rid of it. And you're like, I'm trying to stay connected, but where's the fruit? Why am I struggling with these things? Why can't I get past this? Well, just like with the fruit, it has to grow. Things that we try to get rid of in our lives, many times we can't get rid of them right away. We have to allow the fruit to grow so that we can reach the point that we can get rid of them. And so here's the deal. Jesus said, if you would, if a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. And all through this, we've been talking about struggling with bearing fruit. But Jesus says, if a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. You see, if we're looking at a fruit forecast, there's a 100% chance of fruit in this deal. Right? 100% chance. He didn't say you may bear fruit. He didn't say you might bear fruit. He didn't say, well, there's a possibility this could happen. He said, you will bear fruit, but not just fruit. He said, if you will, much fruit. It will happen. You will bear fruit. You may not get the fruit that you are hoping for. You might bear some other type of fruit along the way. There is going to be fruit if we stay connected. And here's the thing. We have to remain in order to bear that fruit. Which means in the midst of that time where our friends or loved ones seem to be walking away, we continue to pray. Whatever we are going through or struggling with, we continue to remain in Him, and we remain in Him and He is in us, then we bear much fruit. We don't give up staying connected. We have to stay connected to the vine. It's critical for us to be able to bear much fruit. So like we said, if you would, staying connected produces fruit. But the second thing is the inverse, which is obviously true, and that is, if you would, being disconnected produces nothing. Being disconnected produces nothing. Jesus made that plain when He said, if you would, apart from me you can do nothing. And He even took it a step farther. Not only did He say, if you don't remain in me, you can do nothing. He went on to say, if you would, in the next verse of chapter 15, if you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. Not a good day to be that branch, right? Not a good day to be that branch that has become disconnected. So, when we're not connected, there's nothing produced. And what can happen is, when we disconnect, we can begin to look on at other people and almost find ourselves in this judgmental state. Okay? We start finding fault with everybody else rather than looking at what's going on in our own lives and seeing that we need to get reconnected to things. We start using everybody else for the excuse as to why we're not connected. And when we become disconnected from the vine, we begin to become self-centered. We start to look on, make judgments about something someone is doing or not doing, and then find ourselves right there in the midst of it doing exactly the same thing we're complaining about. And that's kind of silly. But yet we do silly things, don't we? You might say, might be one of those parents that said, my kid's never going to act like that. And you find out your kid is just like every other kid. Or we say, you know what, I'm never going to put this or that before my family, and next thing you know, it happens. Or, I'll never put anything before Christ and His church, and then suddenly you're doing exactly what you said you wouldn't do. Other things become more important. You've got to stay connected. It is vitally important. Well, we get that, right? We understand that. We say, yeah, okay, that's important. I'll go with you on that. I agree. 100% I agree. The big question is, we're going to talk about this, is how do we stay connected? How do we do that? How do we stay connected? Well, you might say prayer. Is that a way? Well, yes, absolutely. Prayer is a way to stay connected. Most definitely. How about a worship song that you sing at home? Find yourself, doing something. Next thing you know, you're singing a worship song. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a way of staying connected. Or how about coffee with a friend when they speak truth into your life when you need to hear it? Absolutely. Or how about a sunrise breaking over the mountains in the distance or over the hillsides? Is that a way? Absolutely, if you allow it to draw you to God. Or how about holding a newborn baby? Or a new grandbaby? And you're looking down at it, it's sleeping, and you're thankful. Thanking God that your family is blessed with this new little life. Oh yeah. That's another way of staying connected. Or how about when you see someone stand in the face of terror to protect lives? Do you ever thank God for them? That's staying connected. There's a lot of different ways to stay connected. The problem is that many times we lack the motivation to do so, or we let these other things take place of the more essential ways to stay connected. So what we're going to talk about is a little bit about what God does say fundamentally to get us to stay connected. And look, something like this, if you would. The first thing is, if you would, you have to do what Jesus says. You can watch all the sunrises you want. You can do all of these other things you want. But the bottom line is, they don't mean anything. They don't keep you connected if you're not doing what Jesus says. You have to do what Jesus says. As a matter of fact, later on in John chapter 15, He said, if you obey my commands, you will remain in my love. There it is. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love. There's the connection, one of the connection points. Obeying what Jesus has said to do. I love the way Francis Chan illustrates this when he talks about it. It's like a parent who asks their kid to go clean the room. Where's Lily? Or Ella. You ask the kid to go clean the room. The kid leaves the room, comes back, and you say, did you clean your room? Well, I memorized what you said about cleaning the room. You know where this is going, don't you? Yeah, well, that's great, but did you clean your room? Well, I got it tattooed right here on my arm in Hebrew, what you said, and for me to go clean my room so that I would be reminded, and everybody know that I should clean my room. Yeah, but did you clean your room? Well, I got 4 friends together, and we went to a coffee shop, and we talked about what you meant when you said clean your room, and we even did a word study in the Greek, and it's klenio, and it means to clean in haste and clean with much fortitude. Yeah. Did you clean your room? We also went to a conference, and we talked about what it meant to clean your room, and somebody there even told us how to do a more effective job of cleaning the room. Well, that's great, but did you clean your room? And And that might be God right now in your life saying, seriously, did you clean your room? Did you do what I told you to do? Or did you just memorize the verse? You just keep studying it over and over again, trying to get all the different word positions right so you can make sure you clarify what I meant when I told you to do this. Or did you actually do it? And the bottom line is, many of us just simply need to go clean our room. Right now, God's been telling us to go do something for a long time. He's been confirming it through His Word. For instance, here's the biggie. I harp on this, but the sad reality is, for the vast majority of Christians, this is true, and that is, if you would, Matthew 28. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And we're like, nah, I can't do that. That's just not me. What if I say something wrong? God would say, clean your room. Do what I told you to do. Or maybe this is found in Colossians 3:13 where he says, if you would, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. And you come back, well, but so-and-so did such and such. God would say, clean your room. Or maybe it's that one found in Hebrews chapter 10, beginning at verse 24, if you would. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Let's be honest. We're real good at finding things that are more important or excuses not together with the body, aren't we? It's easy to find something. It's easy to let something get us distracted and pulled aside. It's easy to become disconnected from the vine without even realizing what's happening. And yet God is there consistently saying, clean your room. Do what I've told you to do. And you'll stay connected. And you'll bear fruit. Or maybe it's God putting on your heart and to be a little more selfless and outside of yourself, and God saying, clean your room. You can do this. You can do it. We've got to do what Jesus says. You want to stay connected to His vine, right? Do what He says. We like to embrace the idea that we're children of God and Jesus is our brother, don't we? We like to embrace that. I'm a child of God. You know, the first beginning of the song, I'm so glad I'm a part of the family of God. Joint heirs with Jesus. That means He's our brother. We share in the inheritance. Yo, Jesus is my brother. Yeah. What did Jesus have to say about that? If you would, Matthew 12. While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, His mother and brothers stood outside, wanting to speak to Him. Someone told Him, your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you. He replied to them, who is my mother and who are my brothers? Pointing to His disciples, He said, here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. You want Jesus to be your brother? Do what He says. Because He point blank is saying here, if you don't do what I say, if you don't do what God says, we're not family. Ooh, that's kind of harsh. But that's the reality of what He's saying. And so He says, like we mentioned earlier, if you would, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. The second thing is simple, but we're going to raise it up a notch, and this is where Jesus kind of kicks it up a little bit, and you got to, because the other thing that is in there that we read is that, if you would, love like Jesus loves. Love like Jesus loves. What's that mean? Is that a general statement? Well, let's look at what He says when He tells us to do that. John 15, if you would. My command is this. Love each other as I have loved you. See, here's the deal. When He added that as I have loved you thing, that's where He just raised it up a notch. If he just said, hey, I just want you to love each other, it's kind of a general subjective thing, because it's just a matter of maybe how I feel then. If I feel good, I love you. If I don't feel good, I'll make you miserable with me, whatever. Very subjective love type of thing. And you feel like how should you love your neighbor and whatever, and it's just kind of whatever we think. But he didn't say that. He said to do as he does. Love as he's loved. How have I loved you is the question there that we need to ask. How has Jesus loved us? How has Jesus loved you? That's the same way you've got to love other people. Narrows it down real quickly as to what Jesus means. See, Jesus had a problem. What, Jesus had a problem? Yeah, he had a problem. He had 12 of them. We call them his disciples. He might call them knuckleheads at times, I don't know. Because for years, they've been wanting to know, over and over you see them arguing over who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. And they've been talking about it over and over again, even on the way to Jerusalem. On the way to Jerusalem for the final Passover meal, when Jesus has been thinking about all this stuff he's going to tell them because it's going to be his last meal with them, what are they doing? They're arguing over who's going to be the greatest. And Jesus is like, guys, listen up. The greatest among you is the one who serves. In other words, it's the one who loves. Love as I have loved. And to illustrate what he was talking about when they got to that upper room, one of the things that he did that we find only in John, as John gives us the bigger picture, is, and then when they get to the dinner, Jesus puts a towel around his waist and washes their feet and shows them what he meant on the road. The one who's greatest is the one who will serve. You see, over and over his disciples let him down. But he didn't use it as an excuse to abandon them or stop loving them. Matter of fact, even later on, after all of this took place, we get to John 21, and Peter denies him. Everything else, they're arguing over things, they're doubting, they're struggling with things, and on top of it all, even after he has shown them what it means to love as he is loved, that they need to serve, and he's even going to show them even greater before this point in time. And Peter denies him. And in response, what does Jesus do? Well, in chapter 21, he basically says, if you would, feed my lambs. Feed my sheep. In other words, Jesus was telling Peter, stay connected, and it's in the past. Let's move to the future. Feed my lambs. Feed my sheep. And so it was in a dramatic fashion over dinner that he said, I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you want to remain in Jesus' love, do what he says. Love each other as I have loved you. And that's tough. It means we love each other in spite of the fact that we let each other down. We love each other in spite of the fact that we're not perfect. And then he steps it up another notch in the very next verse where he says, if you would, greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. And then a few short hours later, he would step it up even another notch when he laid down his life even for his enemies. Love as he has loved. So he's raised that standard way up there, hasn't he? It's a high one. Love each other as I have loved you. And here's the reason he did that. He didn't give some long list of things you got to do. He just said you do this. Love as I have loved. Why? Because, let's be honest, we struggle with doing that. We do. The reality is, we're incapable of truly loving the way Jesus is loved. Why? We're human. And if we have any hope of loving the way Jesus has loved, we've got to stay connected to Him so that we bear that fruit. Because it's not in our nature to do it on our own. But when we stay connected, all of a sudden, fruit starts to happen. And we can begin to love each other as He's loved us. And as we do it, it drives us back to the vine. And then it happens again. And he says to love someone in a little deeper way, and then boom, it goes back to the vine again, and the cycle starts again. And as it does, the little blossoms of faith start to bloom and to become fruit. Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit, but apart from me you can do nothing. And the last thing I want us to notice is this, if you would. Staying connected to the vine requires staying connected to the body. Staying connected to the vine requires staying connected to the body. There are two things I would like for us to see briefly when it comes to being connected to the body. First, let's look at Ephesians Chapter 4, picking up at verse 11. It was He who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, some to be pastors and teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head, that is Christ. Do you see the correlation there? Part of the necessity for us to grow and blossom is to be connected to each other. You see, in that passage, Christ is the head, and it's pretty hard to have a functioning head without a body, isn't it? And you can't have a functioning body without a head. And notice how the growth and building up takes place, the gaining sustenance. It is through the body when we come together. This is a picture of the growth that brings about the fruit that Jesus was talking about, that the nurturing takes place when we gather as brothers and sisters in Christ. Have you ever noticed a branch that you clip off perhaps is actually a compilation of smaller branches? Now we call it a branch, but there's actually usually a whole bunch of little ones that are going off of it. So it's not just a single stick poking out from the side of the trunk of a tree or a vine. The smaller individual branches are connected through the larger branches. Understand that connection. In other words, what it's talking about is that there are individuals within the church who are connected to the vine through stronger individuals in the church. It is a connection that is essential for all of us in order to be properly connected to the vine and get sustenance. And those smaller individual branches many times are just you and me. And as we lean on the stronger Christians to help keep us connected in times of strife, when things are really tough. And the joining together is the local church, the gathering of the body. And through the attachment of the local church to the vine, the smaller branches, that's us, receive their sustenance. And then we're able to bear fruit because we're connected to the vine. So remember, we already looked at several passages. There are a lot of other passages we could look at, but remember, if you would, you have to do what Jesus says. And one of the things that His Word says is you've got to stay connected to the body. Because through the body, we're connected to the vine. And we already looked at His command to love each other as He's loved us. Now we can't obey that command unless we're connected to each other and to Him. And the only way we can build right relationships with each other is if we come together, not just casually, but also as His church to worship together. Unless we come together, we can't reflect on what the apostle wrote after what we just read, and that is, if you would, from the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. The body has to come together. The body has to be together in order for that to happen. It's essential. Simply put, if we aren't willing to connect with each other through the assembly of the saints, we definitely will not reflect a loving relationship to the world when we're outside the assembly. And once fruit that is produced through this right relationship with each other becomes evident, the world will know that we are His disciples if we love one another. Kind of like that famous song, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Because the reality is, if it's not taking place in here, it won't be seen out there. The fruit will not be evident. The fruit won't be there. And so Jesus put it this way, if you would. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Notice what he says. He says we must love one another. Not should, or I'd like for you to think about it, or this just might be a good idea. He says we must. And that love is reflected in our willingness to gather together with one another in the assembly and outside of the assembly, to forgive each other when we've let each other down, when we've hurt one another, and to build each other up in Christ, to strengthen one another. Of course, it doesn't mean we've figured out how to be perfect. Far from it. We're still human. We still have our own personalities and hang-ups. We have our differences of opinion many times, and we'll still get upset and angry with each other at times. But the fruit of the Spirit leads us to come together and get beyond those things and love each other as Christ has loved us. That person you're angry with may not deserve your love and forgiveness. Well, you didn't deserve Jesus' love and forgiveness, but He forgave you anyway. He forgave you in spite of the fact you didn't deserve it. And He left it in the past and gave you a fresh new start. No, that was maybe just thinking about today. That's not to mention all the things from yesterday and the day before. Even the things that you're still going to do in the future. To let Him down. He's still going to forgive. Because of Jesus' love for us. And so we forgive the inexcusable in each other and love each other because Jesus forgave the inexcusable in us and loves us. We're patient with each other because Jesus is patient with us. We are good to each other because Jesus is good to us. You see, people around us have all kinds of sin problems. I venture to say most of us might find that amongst our problems is selfishness or love of comfort. Let's face it, in this country we love our comfort, don't we? And that love of comfort, well, that fosters the selfishness. I wonder what most Americans would do if they had to live in a third world country. And it's probably relatively acceptable in our society to love our comfort. But it's unacceptable in the sight of God. What it takes is God taking us and putting us together, which forces us to go back to Him. And He's saying, love each other. And the cycle begins, and God produces some very perfect fruit. His fruit. A little bit of love here, a little bit of joy, a little bit of patience, some kindness, and Lord knows we need patience and kindness, and self-control and faithfulness and gentleness. And all these things begin to produce themselves as we stay connected to the vine and the body, and we begin to build each other up and love each other, and the world knows that we're Jesus' disciples because they see what's going on in our lives, and the fruit of the Spirit begins to bring kingdom growth. My question would be simply this. What fruit is being evidenced in your life? Love, joy, peace, patience? Or have you stopped seeing some of those things taking place? Because as Jesus said, when we remain in Him and He in us, we will bear fruit, much fruit. But apart from Him, we can do nothing. Because you see, what it really comes down to is this, if you would, being connected is the key. Being connected to the vine. As we stay connected to the vine and to each other, we love each other and we're patient with each other and good to each other. And what happens is God takes our loneliness and replaces it with comfort. He takes our desires and replaces them with His desires. As we love each other and as we remain connected, we find ourselves one day in the middle of something incredible going on in our lives. God doing something in us to produce some kind of special fruit that we may never have expected. Maybe you're saying, I'm a follower of Christ and I just need God's help to be able to stay connected. I'm sure most of us do. Maybe you're going through something that's somewhat difficult or maybe really difficult or maybe it's a really good time. I don't know. In all times, what we need to understand is what? We need to stay connected in the good times and the bad times. Because staying connected means that regardless of what's going on in our lives, we will bear fruit. As we prepare to close, everything we talked about in this entire series goes back to what God told Moses. Do you remember when Moses was there at the burning bush? He's arguing with God. And he gets to the point and he says, well, what's your name? What if they ask me what your name is? What am I going to tell them? Who are you? And God says, I am that I am. Tell them, I am sent you. And then we have all of these I am statements of Jesus in John. And what it really comes down to is this. He's saying, I am everything you need. Stay connected. No matter what's going on in your life, I am everything you need. Stay connected to me. And whatever's happening, you will get through it. And you will bear fruit. He's everything you need. Your shepherd, the resurrection and the life, light, the vine from which you draw sustenance. He's everything you need. Stay connected. Are you staying connected today? Or are there things struggling, making it hard to stay connected? Getting reconnected only takes one step back toward Him. What do you need to do in your life today to ensure that you stay connected?